Good morning. Ooh, I cannot, you're on mute. I did the thing where I have everyone start on mute. I'm going to go ahead and start then. It's 12:02. Hi, everyone. My name is Gage Woolley. I am the program director for Alumni and Donor Experience for the UCAA. That's the University of Cincinnati Alumni Association. I'm excited to have everyone here today for the Travel Nursing 101 webinar. I think it's going to be a great topic, and we have two awesome presenters to talk about travel nursing. So before we begin, I just want to let everyone know we are recording this. So if you have any issues, or anything along those lines, we'll be sending this out after. We'll be available. So just so that is aware. But I'm going to go ahead and start with some bios about our guest speakers, and then I will also be your moderator today. So I'll be asking questions and having Stephanie and Taylor here answer them. So again, thanks everyone for being here, and I'll go ahead and start now. So I'm going to start with Stephanie Lux. Stephanie graduated with her BSN from Cincinnati, University of Cincinnati in 2014. She worked for several years in the float pool at the Cincinnati Children's Hospital before beginning to work as a travel nurse. During her time as a travel nurse, she worked in pediatrics in Portland, Oregon, San Diego, and Colorado. She also spent several months volunteering as a nurse in a place in Guatemala, because I can't read it, I'll be honest. Maybe she can announce that for us later. She now works as a family nurse practitioner at a public health clinic in Portland, Oregon. We also have Taylor Mielek here today. Taylor has been a nurse for 5 years, all of which have been in an emergency department setting. In January of 2019, she started her traveling nursing career in Washington, D.C. And from there, she did different assignments in John Day, Oregon, Redding, California, Salinas, California, Dallas, Cordell, Texas, and now currently in Cleveland, Ohio. She loves traveling in the country with her 3-year-old golden retriever Winnie, and plans to continue travel nursing for the foreseeable future. Stephanie also has a golden retriever, so lucky to have dual golden retrievers here today as well. So thank you both for being here today, and I'll go ahead and just start this question off with, tell us about your kind of experience requirements, or just maybe a generality about what it takes to become a travel nurse. Steph, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So I think that's kind of the first question that everybody kind of asks about travel nursing is what needs to happen before you can kind of make the decision to become a travel nurse and what preparation you need to do. For sure, my recommendation, and generally the experience requirement, is 2 years of experience in whatever specialty you're hoping to travel in. So like Gage said, I did float pool at Cincinnati Children's, so I was fortunate that I had experience in several different areas of pediatrics, so I was able to kind of tailor my resume for whatever specialty area within pediatrics I was hoping to get an assignment. So that's one kind of avenue to go, is to get varied experience as an RN before you start to travel. But for the most part, like if you want to travel in labor and delivery, or you want to travel in emergency room, you need 2 years of that specific thing before they'll even look at your resume. Taylor might be able to speak a little bit more to what is different now with COVID. I think there's a lot of things that have kind of been waived or brushed under the table because of the pandemic. But at the same time, I think 2 years is a very good kind of turning point where you're probably going to start to feel comfortable with a 2-day orientation on a new unit and being able to just kind of jump into a new hospital.
Yeah, I kind of agree with Steph. I have seen kind of the array. I mean, I've seen nurses that have been nurses for 20 plus years go into traveling. And then I've also seen the opposite in COVID, where we have, the 1 year experience, really excited to travel. And I have seen those people struggle. It's one of those things where if you don't have that immediate knowledge base and your critical thinking skills and your time management already pre-established, it can be very, very difficult to go in some of these hospitals that are struggling with their staffing and their internal problems and not knowing where anything is or who anybody is. So having your kind of core skills and background and nursing all of those things is definitely really important. So 2 years is usually a good marker. But yeah, just like Steph said, there's so much that goes into the background of starting nursing. You got to make sure that you're up to date on all of your certifications, and like I have a Google Drive of, you have to have vaccination records and kind of your resume, everything at a drop of a hat. So there's a lot of pre-planning you have to think about.
Great. So what are some of the benefits of travel nursing that you've seen? You've done it for 5 years, and Stephanie, you did it for 2. Taylor, if you want to start this one, that'd be great.
I mean, the obvious benefit that draws a lot of people is the money. I think that's kind of the selling point these days. I will say that that also comes with some cons, but definitely the money and the flexibility. Right now, I am taking an assignment close to home. I grew up in Ohio, so I'm in Cleveland, so I could be home for the holidays. So I'm not driving or flying across the country, which I've had to do before. And then this assignment's over right about Thanksgiving, and then I have the ability to take off 6 weeks through the holidays, which I'm really excited about. So flexibility, and traveling the country, that's super exciting. Seeing new places, not having to deal with some of the caveats of a staff job where you kind of have some politics and things like that. So it's kind of nice just to go in fresh faced. Those are my probably top 3.
Great. Stephanie?
I completely agree. I think Taylor covered it. Certainly the money is there. The higher the pay that they're offering, probably the more of a disaster that unit is, the more desperate they are, the higher, probably the more stressful your shifts are going to be, and you're going to maybe have more patients and more responsibility and things like that. So that kind of comes with a little bit of pitfall as well. But yeah, I mean, I travel nursed for 2 years or so and was able to completely pay for NP school, like in the income difference between being a staff nurse and being a travel nurse. And that was way pre-pandemic. So like there are travel nurses that are making well over double what I did when I was travel nursing. So things have really, really changed. So money is certainly there. I also loved what Taylor is saying about like the flexibility to take time off between assignments. It can be a little bit tricky sometimes to get, you don't get PTO or anything usually as a travel nurse. You might get like a day or 2 of sick time that they'll give you some money for. That's more kind of details of the travel nursing life, but you have to ask for your time off. Like if you do have a vacation plan during a contract, you have to let them know about that up front. It's really hard to get last minute things covered during an assignment. But I would do what Taylor did also and be like, okay, I want to go on vacation. Like I went to Alaska for 2 weeks between assignments one time. And or like like Gage was saying, I went to Guatemala for a couple months, and that wasn't like an official assignment. That was just something I wanted to do, but I didn't have anybody to answer to. I didn't need to ask anybody's permission because you're basically just on your own. Yeah, and when I was looking at contracts, it was exactly what Taylor was kind of saying. It's like money and location were always kind of my 2 things. And then the third being like, what's the hospital? Like, is it a good hospital? Is it a rural hospital, like a teaching hospital, rural hospital? Am I going to be working days or nights? Like kind of the details of the assignment, or for me, like the unit and things like that, were kind of the 3 things that I would balance. Cause sometimes I, wanted a higher paying assignment, or sometimes I really wanted to go to San Diego. So I made some compromises in the other areas to try to make that happen.
Yeah, you definitely have to make sure that you know what you personally are looking for out of it, and kind of have to, pro and con it and see what's the most important for you to pick something.
Great. And then we got a question from the crowd, and I think it's perfect to go along with what we're talking about. Are the assignments always 6 weeks typically, or how long are the contracts? Do they last usually?
I'd say most places look for 13 weeks. It's usually about 3 months with a week of orientation. But nowadays, honestly, there's such a high demand. You can find anything from, 4-week assignments and then every variation through there.
Yeah, definitely 13 weeks is kind of the original standard for travel nursing. Like when I was doing it pre-pandemic, there was some short-term assignments like strike coverage and things like that that would pop up that would maybe be higher paying. That like maybe you would just stay in a hotel for the duration of the assignment rather than getting official housing and stuff like that. But yeah, certainly anything goes. One thing I've been noticing a lot of is really kind of sketchy hour requirements, though. Like 13 weeks, 36 hours used to be the standard. And now I'm seeing contracts that they're like, oh, this contract pays $6,000 a week, but you're going to be working 60 hours, like 60 scheduled hours or something like that. So previously 13 and 30, like 13 weeks, 36 hours standard. And now the hours that they're asking travelers to commit to are really, really high. So I think that that's, to me, that's a little bit of a red flag. You might be willing to just kind of buckle up and suck it up for the duration of assignment if it's paying really well, but know that you're probably walking into a little bit of a war zone if that's what they're saying is like the only thing they'll accept.
What's the longest assignment you've seen?
I think
I
13.
I extended, which is also an option. So extensions, that's kind of based on how well you like the hospital, if the hospital likes you, obviously. So, I mean, I was in Washington, D.C. for 6 months. So I did an extension on top of my original assignment. So really, as long as you're being careful about how long you're in a certain place, because that plays into your taxes, which is also the biggest loophole as a travel nurse, and your stipends that are tax-free. You can't be in any one place. I think it's for 364 calendar days. That is the maximum. And then some places like California, that's in a 2-year period. So you if you're there for a year and really loved California, you'll have to go away and cannot come back for a full year or risk tax issues.
And it's generally like you have to go 50 miles is sort of the rule of thumb. Is that still the case, Taylor? So like I think you could stay within California, but you would need to do like San Diego and then like San Francisco or something like that. Like I think you could get away with doing it that way.
California is actually weird. I ran into this last year. It's state by state, but yeah, California is in a 2-year period and it's 364 days period, no matter where you are in the state.
Okay. I think other states would be different. Like you could do a year in Cleveland and then a year in Cincinnati if you were from Nebraska or something like that.
It just all relates back to taxes, and it's a lot of research that you end up having to do.
Yeah. But I think generally Taylor's right that like 13 weeks is like, for the most part, the longest they're going to post an assignment for, and then you can extend. It certainly can be really lucrative to kind of extend someplace because you don't have the expenses of moving, and like you can find housing that you can just stay at and things like that. So that can be nice, and you don't have to reorient to a new hospital. I actually traveled here in Portland for 363 days before I officially said I like relocated here. So that was a loophole I kind of took advantage of. Was I knew I had moved here, but I still consider myself a traveler for a full year and just like traveled around in this area before I committed to like actually saying I had relocated.
Great. And then 2 questions for your guys' conversations. Do you always have to go through a travel nursing agency?
There are a couple random not agencies, I don't know what the word is that I'm looking for, but essentially you're your own agency. You can look through these job postings that some companies offer, and you kind of have to do all the legwork that an agency and a recruiter would do for you. But typically that's your best route, your safest route, one that you're most cared for with, I guess, as a person.
Yeah, the recruiter thing is really tricky and can get kind of complicated and messy a little bit, but I wouldn't do it without. There are people who find ways to kind of make that work, but generally like there are certain agencies that have access to certain contracts. So you're going to have to kind of shop around to figure out where you're going to go. And I don't know how readily hospitals are going to take like a freelancer who's not affiliated with an agency. It's like the hospital has a contract with the agency and then the agency has a contract with you. And so you kind of have to know what's in both of those contracts to make sure that nothing funny is happening. But I don't know how you would like go back channels to avoid needing an agency altogether. Yeah, because they kind of propose the details of your contract and everything like that to the hospital.
And then the next question was, can you take a travel assignment locally without accepting a living stipend?
Occasionally it gets a little tricky. It just depends on the hospital. I was attempting to travel local where I live in Florida currently. And the hospitals denied me. They said that they didn't want any local travelers. Not really sure why. But it is possible. Everything just ends up being taxed super high.
Yeah, so pre-pandemic it was possible, but financially the benefits weren't there because you don't have access. You have to be 50 miles from home in order to get kind of that tax-free money. Again, it's a little loophole-y on the tax piece, and that we could do like an entire one of these probably on taxes. But pre-pandemic, it was not worth it to do a local contract because by the time you got taxed, it was similar to what you would make at a hospital. Now that's not the case, but yes, a lot of cities and a lot of hospital networks are cracking down and not letting local travelers because they're like hemorrhaging staff to travel nursing because there's so much money. So the entire state of Texas, I think, right?
Yep.
Taylor has said, no, if you're from Texas, you can't travel in Texas because everybody's just leaving to kind of go seek, like if you're going to work this hard during a pandemic, you might as well make double as a traveler rather than stay at your staff job. So
yeah, I've noticed they're enforcing the 50-mile rule a lot more lately. I do have one of my best friends in Chicago. That's where she's from, and she is doing a local contract right now. She was able to finagle getting a pretty decent pay package out of it. But I mean, like I said, she is getting taxed like an outrageous amount. Still bringing home more than a staff job, but it's one of those things where you have to weigh it, which is more important to you, to be local or, get the money.
Yeah, and you can certainly like find ways to kind of make it work. Like I grew up in Columbus and then I lived in Cincinnati after I graduated from UC. And my first contract, I wanted to just kind of see if I liked it. So I kept my apartment in Cincinnati and then drove down to Columbus to work at Nationwide Children's. I did 3 back-to-back shifts and like stayed with my parents and then drove back to Cincinnati after those. And so you can kind of work some things like if you have, I don't know, that was probably not my best move ever in terms of taxes. And again, we won't get into that in too much detail today, but like you can kind of make some things work like that as long as you follow the tax rules.
Perfect. So we've talked a lot about all the great things about travel nursing. What might be some possible pitfalls or red flags about travel nursing?
I mean, I one of my most recent assignments was in Dallas, Texas. I was really excited to be there. I'd never been in Dallas. And we had taken a contract, me and one of the girls that I usually travel with. And this hospital was just awful. It was so unsafe, like the ratios. I've never really cried as a nurse, and I was coming home crying every day after the shifts. Like it was just mentally, physically, emotionally draining. The staff there weren't kind, and they honestly kind of bullied you. So you can walk into some really hostile environments, especially now that, travel nursing is so big and people compared to staff nurses, we are making a lot more. So a lot of them, when you go in, see you as the enemy rather than someone there to like lend help. So I ended up leaving that assignment before my contract was over, which is not the greatest thing in the world. It does kind of reflect poorly on you in the future. I did have good reasons as to why, and I did work with the hospital and I gave my 2 weeks, and like there is a process to it. So you can get into some really shady situations, which is hard when you're going in blind, and you can only know so much about a hospital walking in, and it can get a little shady.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing, especially now during the pandemic, is there are certainly a lot of safety concerns. You have to really kind of like be your own advocate in terms of making sure that what you're doing is like good for your own physical and mental health and things like that, because it can be really, really nasty. Certainly there are some hostile work environment things. That was true pre-pandemic also. I only had one assignment where I felt like kind of slighted as a travel nurse, where they would give you kind of the crappy assignments and the nurses wouldn't be very helpful, and we had like mandatory overtime and just a lot of stuff that's just like, it just kind of isn't fun. Like it just kind of stinks the whole time a little bit. But for me, I didn't really care. I just like to show up, do my 12 hours and leave. Like I just didn't I didn't sweat it, because I was making really good money and I was living on the beach and I didn't really care. So now during the pandemic, I feel like it's more like safety issues. Like I didn't feel like I had unsafe assignments or anything like that. It was just like maybe the patients that had been there a while that nobody else wanted to take care of, that kind of stuff. I think the biggest negative of travel nursing for me is having to work with recruiters, because some of them I feel like do kind of have your best interest in mind. I ended up with like a company that I was pretty comfortable with and felt like they did, kind of have my best interest at heart. But a lot of them, like we were talking about, with you had to, pick a different company to get an assignment in the place you wanted to go to. Some of them are just really, really shady and, are taking a lot of the pie in terms of your pay package and you don't know it. I had to actually like pursue like some action with one of my companies because they were like just like nickel and diming my paychecks and taking some things away. And so there's some weird stuff that can happen with agencies and recruiters. And I feel like they take advantage a little bit of like knowing that nurses are generally like people with big hearts and are kind and like assume positive intent and all of these things. Like we have a lot of like genuine personality qualities, and I think a lot of them kind of take a little bit of advantage of that. So you have to be pretty tough and good at advocating for yourself. Another thing that's kind of sorry.
You definitely have to do your research. Yes.
Yeah. And just make sure you're getting good recommendations from friends and things like that. I was the first of my friends to go do travel nursing. Like I feel like I helped Taylor when she first started, be like, start with this company because they're gonna back you up. I didn't have any of that, so I was just like Googling like travel nursing agencies. So certainly like having a friend or just reach out to people and be like, hey, which company do you like, and that sort of thing. And that's going to be a lot better start than I had. The other thing that is a difficult part of travel nursing is you always have to be looking for the next assignment for the most part. Like if you're doing your 13-week and you're using it to kind of see different places, like you're kind of always interviewing for jobs. You're always working with recruiters. You're always looking for housing. I always found my own housing because you made more money to do it that way. And so it's stressful. I mean, it's stressful to not, my dog's feet, sorry. It's stressful to not know where you're going to be in December when it's the end of October. Because previously sometimes they would, not hire people until 2 or 3 weeks before the assignment started. So
I'm taking stuff and I'm already stressing and looking for my next assignment to start in January. So again, like she said, like it's very stressful because you have to quickly sign a contract, find a contract, sign a contract, and then find housing, which I highly, highly recommend looking for before you ever sign a contract.
Great. No, that's awesome. Thank you for some of those pitfalls. Next, we're going to talk about some logistics, and there's some questions I think relate to that. And I'll get to those, but I figure we just start with the questions we already had. So talk a little bit about the logistics of housing. I know we just kind of little bit at the end there talked about it, but if you want to go into it a little bit more, maybe search for your own housing, or is it easier to go with the agency sometimes? Or I'd love to hear your answers.
I actually don't think that I haven't been around any agencies that actually find you housing anymore. A lot of it is self-housing. I have a lot of trial and error in that respect. There are some really good things. I've been in some really bad ones. a lot of it, the best resource that I can give travel nurses is called Furnished Finders. It's essentially like the traveling healthcare professional version of Airbnb. You can rent rooms or full places. I've done both. Like currently I'm renting the third floor of this couple's house. It's a very interesting living situation. But yeah, it gets really hard because if you're going to, say, a smaller area, trying to find housing in that area sometimes is next to impossible. So you really have to do your research. I know I have a couple of friends that use Craigslist, which that sketches me out a little bit. I've also used Airbnb. It's a little bit more expensive. I've stayed in hotels. It really just depends on the assignment.
Yeah, I did prioritize a little bit places where I knew a person or two, because I was doing it as more of a short term, like I knew I was going to do it for a couple of years. I knew where I wanted to go. And so like, for example, when I came out here, I had like my boyfriend's family, some of them are out here. So we were able to like rent a room from people who lived here. And so we had to like go to IKEA and buy a mattress, and like we just like slept on a mattress on the floor, but the rest of the house was furnished. So, and I did a similar thing in Denver. Actually, my sister lives there, and like her husband's kickball team, somebody had a room they were renting out. And so I was able to find some cheap options that way with a person, like a friend of a friend sort of situation. But yeah, when I was in San Diego, I lived in an Airbnb, and it was very expensive, but I didn't care because I was on the beach and it was a well-paying assignment. And so that was easy, but housing is stressful. Craigslist is sketchy. There's short-term furnished housing is very expensive. You're not going to move, a full furniture set every 3 months. It's just not possible. Everything I owned fit in my like compact car. And so I certainly think finding your own housing and finding furnished housing and just knowing you're going to way overpay to have something that's convenient and safe and that you can be confident with. There's also, I don't know if this is still the case because they would always blow up my notifications. I kind of left the groups, but there are a handful of like travel nursing groups on Facebook that are super robust and active. They have all sorts of options, and there's a housing one that like when my friends here like trying to rent out a room or something, I tell them to post it on there, and vice versa. So that can be a really good resource. I wish I had found that sooner in my time of nursing.
That was actually one thing that saved me was a Facebook housing group. I got into some really bad housing situation. My very first assignment, you don't know everything that you don't know. And I got into a really unsafe area in Washington, D.C. And obviously I didn't know it when I found the housing. And I posted an SOS after a poor altercation in that general housing area. And I was like, SOS, I really need like safe housing. And a woman reached out to me, and it happened the next morning. And so you really have to have your resources lined up and make sure that do your research about the neighborhood and safety and those things beforehand. And if you plan to travel with a pet, also, I wanted to bring up, it is exponentially harder to try to find housing. I love my dog. I would never travel without my dog. But to find housing is exponentially more stressful. There's probably one pet-friendly housing to every 20, that are not pet-friendly. So it definitely limits where you're able to go.
Yeah, I waited until after I've kind of wrapped up with travel nursing to get a dog, because she's absolutely right. One, I think it can be really hard on pets to be in a different environment so frequently. And also, yeah, definitely 1 in 5, maybe 1 in 10 places are pet friendly, because I think, short-term furnished housing, they just have like the luxury of saying no to people with pets. So if you don't already have, it's possible, if you already have a pet, don't get rid of your pet. You can still be a travel nurse for sure. But if you don't already have a pet and you think you want to be a travel nurse, I would say just wait.
Yeah.
Borrow your friends' dogs for now.
So how does insurance and 401k work with travel nursing? Is it possible? Are those things Do those things exist?
They do. Insurance with any agency is either going to be extremely expensive, or it's going to be, you're going to pick the not expensive one and you're going to have absolutely no benefits. You also lose insurance between contracts. So you not working equals no insurance. So if you need to take that into account, that's kind of a hard thing to do. 401ks, some agencies offer them, some don't. Just remember that that's based off of your taxable dollars, which is the very, very small part of your income. So it's based off of the $20 an hour versus what you're actually making. So you're really not going to pull anything in if you're not putting in extra. I would recommend getting a personal 401k and moving those funds yourself, especially if you plan on jumping between agencies or things like that. It'll make your life a little bit easier.
Taylor, what do you do for, if you don't mind saying, what do you do for health insurance, since you tend to take time off between assignments and that sort of thing?
So I pray that I am a healthy individual.
Oh no.
I am very bad. Probably should not do as I do. I want to maximize my amount of money, and really for me, spending $500 on private healthcare insurance a month is just not the move, not the option. And I'm single, so it's not, I don't have a significant other to fall back on. And I'm also over 26, which is, just a big whammy. So I wing it. If you are in between assignments, sometimes COBRA can apply to you. I have had travel nurse friends that are in between assignments, don't have health insurance, and she did end up in the hospital. But COBRA was extended to her, and that did end up helping her out. So it's just something that you really have to think about if you're someone that has chronic health issues, chronic medications. You really have to think about what's best for you.
Yeah, so I travel nursed before I turned 26, and so I had been off my parents' insurance for a while, but I asked them to put me back on, and then I just paid them for the part of, for my portion of the policy. And so that was an option I was fortunate that was an option for me, but now I'm obviously over 26, so that wouldn't be the case anymore. If I had continued to travel nurse, I'm not confident. I'm too accident prone. I don't know. I wouldn't have the guts to not have health insurance. So I feel like if I had continued to travel nurse, I would have done one of two things. I either would have done like Affordable Care Act, healthcare marketplace, and overpaid for insurance. I had to do that for a short bit between grad school and when I started my NP job. And it actually wasn't terrible. The West Coast has better options for Kaiser, and a couple others are better options for kind of pay-as-you-go insurance compared to what's available in Ohio. So I was able to pay, I think it was $250 a month for just medical, no dental or vision or anything. So I would probably do that just as like a catastrophic policy, especially since you make so much more money as a travel nurse. You are gonna earn that back, even if it is a much more expensive than you would pay for a premium at a hospital job. The other option I feel like is you have to sacrifice a little bit flexibility of where you're going to go and a little bit of your flexibility to take time off between assignments, which Taylor and I both said that was one of our kind of favorite perks. But you're going to do it long term. You can be brand loyal. You can be agency loyal and say, okay, I'm going to stick with this company and I'm going to do back-to-back assignments, because then you won't have as big a problem with, like, you probably can get day one insurance and then it'll kind of extend. Might still be expensive and might still be bad coverage, but at least you will have kind of the continuity of insurance that way. And if you were a person with chronic health conditions and needed something more than like catastrophic coverage, I feel like you could prioritize healthcare benefits when you're picking your company. So that might mean sacrificing a little bit the caliber of the assignments or the pay grade for the assignment, but I think that that's not like a total deal breaker. It just makes things a little bit more restrictive in terms of how you maximize your travel nursing experience.
A lot of agencies, they do sorry, I think I'm echoing. They will cover you up to 28 days. Like Steph said, if you are staying loyal to a certain agency, if you are on an assignment and have another one booked after, even if you take up to 28 days in between assignments, they will extend your coverage for your health insurance through that. So I did do that for my first couple assignments. I was pretty loyal to one particular agency. And so I did have continuous healthcare coverage. I've kind of gotten into where I'm alternating or flipping between different agencies based on a multitude of things. But so most recently I was out of insurance for like a month and a half and just winging it and hoping that I am a healthy human. So like Steph said, you just really, it's travel nursing is so, personalized to you and what your goals are and what your needs are. You just have to really think about what your priorities are when you're searching for a company.
Perfect. And this question might be just for Taylor. I don't know, Stephanie, if you travel with a friend or not, but somebody asked, is it easy to do travel nursing with pairs / with a friend, or is it hard to find 2 assignments in one place?
I did the first part of my travel nursing solo. It was a little lonely. So I actually did find a travel nurse friend on an assignment. She's one of my best friends now. And we do typically travel together. We're taking home assignments, each of us currently. And then we're planning to travel again in January. It does make it slightly more difficult. I mean, right now there's such a need for nurses that a lot of times there are the openings that are available. We are both ER, which I found to be harder if your travel partner is of the same specialty as you. It can get a little bit harder to find assignments. I know couples and travel pairs that have different specialties, and they have a little bit easier go of things. Like I know an ICU med surge travel pair, and they can go pretty much anywhere they want. And then, like I said, me with my friend, we're both ER, and it does make it a little bit harder because a lot of hospitals are a little leery of travel pairs, and they don't like to give you same schedules, I guess is what I'm getting at. So they can ask that in your interviews, and sometimes you do get turned down if you're like, no, like we want the same schedules. Her and I, we go in knowing that that's probably not going to be the case, and we're okay with that. We kind of block off time together within our contracts to make sure that we can still see each other, but it's doable for sure. I know a lot of people do it, so you just have to be a little bit more willing to given other aspects to be able to travel with someone though.
Yeah, I never traveled with a friend, though I did, like, I think if I had traveled by myself, I totally would have done what Taylor does. Like, you definitely make friends very quickly with the other travel nurses on a unit, and to kind of like magnetize towards each other. My partner's actually, he's a mechanical engineer and had been working in Greensburg, Indiana, which is like an hour in, I can't even remember what direction, west of Cincinnati, and was not good at my Midwest geography anymore. Anyway, and was very bored, but had been working a lot and saved a lot of money. So he actually quit his job and lived off his savings and traveled around with me for 18 months, which was super, super fun. It just happened to work out for us that way, but obviously that's not going to be an option for everyone. But do you feel like, if you are married or you have a partner, I think now, like in the age of lots of like remote jobs and things like that, he didn't have, just because of the type of engineering he does, he didn't have the option of a remote job, especially pre-pandemic. So he just like rock climbed and hiked and lived on the cheap. But certainly if you have a partner or something, that's doable, because I had plenty of money to pay for housing and I was going to be paying for housing anyway. So that worked out for us. And was nice, but certainly traveling alone and hoping, my plan, if he hadn't traveled with me, was to go to cities where I knew someone, and to kind of do it that way. But certainly traveling as a pair, as long as you're kind of flexible, like Taylor was saying about, you might not get your first choice hospital, or you might have to be a little bit flexible about schedules and things like that. It's certainly possible to travel with a friend, and can save you money if you can split housing.
It saves us a ton on housing. That was our initial, not that we didn't like each other, but the housing to save money was a huge plus.
Gage, you're muted.
I'm on mute. New. Next question from the audience. Does how many years you've been doing travel nursing have an impact on getting assignments in fun places, like on the beach, for example?
I think your number of years as a nurse certainly impacts it. For me, before pre-pandemic, if you didn't have 2 years of nursing experience in something, they weren't probably going to even look at your resume. Travel nursing interviews are literally, do you have the experience in the thing that they need you for? If you have a year or two or whatever they want as an L&D or as a peds ICU or whatever, do you have the experience for that? And when can you start? And what shift do you want? Like, those are really, they're not going to ask you like, tell me 3 things you're good at and 3 things you're bad at. Like, it is matching a need to a human, and that's it. But I don't think that, maybe if there's 2 candidates that are really similar, they might pick somebody who's done travel nursing for a longer time, but I don't think that plays too much into it. Certainly first time travelers, they might ask you a few more questions, I suppose, but I don't think it's not that hard to get a travel nursing assignment somewhere in something. But definitely if you are jumping ship and gonna go from being a bedside nurse for 6 or 8 months, I think that will certainly play into your ability to get assignments if you have not enough experience in whatever you're doing.
It also depends on the facility. The one that I'm at currently, they have a lot of new grads that they had hired like internally, like as staff nurses. So they were looking for a specific target of nursing years. So every travel nurse that they've hired at my current assignment has had, 4 years or more experience, because they need the seniority and like kind of those people to go to for questions. So I have run into that. Actually, it's funny that you mentioned that stuff about the interviews. I actually did have someone give me a full-on grilling interview recently. So it threw me for a loop, because it usually is a little bit quicker and to the point. So it's not to say that you can't get these assignments with less years. I will say the more years, the more someone looks at you as a greater potential for their department, and adds more for them. So it's kind of a hit or miss. It just depends on the facility, more or less.
Yeah, and depending on your specialty too, like Taylor, you would need like a certain level of ER experience to be I can't remember if it's 1 is low and 4 is high, or how
1's high.
Yeah. 1's high. Okay. So if you've only worked in a level 3 ER, they're not going to probably hire, at least pre-pandemic, they're not going to hire you for a level 1 ER. The same goes for NICU, neonatal ICU. If you don't have experience in the right level of NICU, like if you've done mom baby, they're not going to take you at Cincinnati Children's, right? So you definitely need the objective thing on your resume to be able to fit whatever need they're looking for. They're not going to take you for an ICU assignment if you've only done med surg. If you don't have that experience, they're not going to take you in a COVID ICU.
A lot of places won't take you either if you haven't had recent experience in those areas. So say you were a peds nurse for 3 years and then now you're, labor and delivery. Sometimes they will not take you for a pediatric assignment because you have not had that within a certain time frame. Usually it's within like the last year. So just something to keep in mind.
We're getting down to some of our last questions from the crowd. What agencies would you guys recommend?
Steph, you gave me my initial go ahead, so you can go.
Yeah, I don't know, Taylor, you might be able to say, and this is certainly a question that you guys can hit us with like offline also, if you are kind of choosing between some, because it's not a simple question to answer, because like we were saying, it depends what you're looking for. Like I really value having a transparent agency, having like recruiter that I feel like I can trust and actually like cares that I get an assignment that I'm going to stick with and that sort of thing, or have an assignment I'm going to enjoy. So the company I traveled with was PPR. I think they are now completely called Medical Solutions, right?
Yeah.
So that was one I liked. I highly recommend the company that I had all the issues with in California with the wage theft and all of that, like small print stuff between the hospital and the agency. That was with American Mobile, AMN. They have a lot of exclusive contracts in California, and they have a million companies that are called something else, but they're actually affiliated with AMN. So my personal opinion is stay away from all of that mess. Sometimes it's like a wolf in sheep's clothing sort of thing where like the contract looks real good. It's not. So if you're a first-time travel nurse, I would look up American Mobile and all of their like minions that they've bought out over the years and avoid all of that mess because it's all the same. I know you're with Aya now. I did medical staffing options for a contract and that was fine. So yeah, it's not a straightforward question to answer, but you can definitely hit us both up offline and we can help steer you in the right direction or help keep you away from some of the nasties.
The best advice is to get someone that is a travel nurse to give you a recommendation, because it's also very recruiter based. So you can have a company and then within the company you can have really awful recruiters and you can have really great recruiters. So I, thankfully had an in with Stephanie kind of sending me in the right direction when I was first starting. I started with PPR, loved them. They were great. My recruiter, when they got absorbed into Medical Solutions, I stuck with her. She's amazing. I like that company a lot. They don't have some of the bigger contracts, so it is a little bit of a downfall. So I do switch between them and Aya depending on what I'm looking for. Aya is who I'm with currently, and they seem to be pretty good. Not as personal as Medical Solutions was, which is kind of a downfall for me. But like I said, I was more destination based, so they you kind of got to pick and choose. Do your research.
Great, and I actually shared both Taylor and Stephanie's emails in the chat. So if anybody does want to reach out, please, take advantage of that opportunity. There's one final question from the crowd, and Stephanie, you mentioned international volunteering in Guatemala earlier. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So I will also like couch this a little bit with international travel nursing does exist. I looked into it a lot, and it felt very not worth it to me. I like started the process to do like a contract in Ireland. Sounds real sparkly and cool, but they don't pay their nurses anything. It's like 20 grand a year for 6-bed assignments, and it's real terrible. And it takes like a year to get in. You have to do like all of these steps. It's at least like $1,000 to $1,200 out of pocket from your own money that's not going to come from the agency before you can even be like in the pool of people to be considered for an international traveling contract. So I decided that I would much rather, like if I wanted to go live in Europe for a little bit, I would have rather like taken a really high paying assignment in California and then taken like 3 months off and like go work at Starbucks in London. Like I'm not even exaggerating because it was that like convoluted and complicated. There are some, like I almost took an assignment in Guam that they pay a lot, or at least they did pre-pandemic. I think you're pretty isolated on the island, but I thought that would be cool. So that's an option. If you're interested in that, let me know. There's like one agency that sends people to Guam. I think they do take people in like New Zealand and some other countries, but for me, it was like the incentive was not there. I would rather just go bop around a country by myself. What I did in Guatemala, I worked at like just a pediatric primary care clinic, like as a volunteer, and took Spanish classes and just hung out. If you are interested in that, you can also hit me up about that because I have some couple contacts for clinics and stuff like that take medical volunteers. But yeah, I was there for about 4 months. It was really fun. It was a good experience, but I didn't make any money while I was there. So it was very cheap. I think my apartment was like $95 a month. So it was very affordable, and I didn't like use a bunch of my savings because I was living in a affordable country, but you also have to be able to have that flexibility to do that. Yeah, does that answer the question? Maybe whoever asked that can pipe up and clarify what else you're curious about if you have more questions.
Perfect. Taylor, do you have anything to add? If not, I'll ask the next question.
You just have to be really careful about international nursing. Like Steph said, it's difficult to get into in the first place, but if you're planning on coming back to the US, that's where I found that there's a lot of issues coming back. If you want to travel nurse, you don't have that experience within the US, and a lot of places won't take that as recent experience, and you'll have a lot of difficulties. And because their nursing is so different country to country, a lot of it doesn't always translate back to the US. So you just have to be really careful with that. It sounds great, but like Steph said, a lot of it's not worth it unless you're planning to move there permanently.
Great. Last question. We actually have about 8 minutes left. Last question from the crowd that I have recently is it less likely to work day shift, or how does scheduling work in general typically?
I mean, shift traditionally in staff nursing, obviously day shift is kind of like the pinnacle, and it takes forever to get there because it's usually seniority based. Travel nursing is definitely not like that. I mean, you kind of have your pick of anything. You might have to be careful if you like want to go to a certain place, but they have days, nights, mids, any variation of mid shifts, and you can find that just about anywhere. Scheduling depends on the hospital. Usually you just kind of submit in your contract your days off, and then they just put you in their like holes in their schedule, and you really don't have a say unless you like put in your contracts that you want block scheduling, which means you work like 7 days on, 7 days off. Or the place I'm at now, they actually allow you to kind of put in your requests for your schedule and like a ghost schedule, and then they move it around. So it just kind of depends.
Yeah, I worked straight nights up in as like when I worked at Children's in Cincinnati. But once I shifted to travel nursing, I like was pretty committed to staying on day shift, mostly because I was traveling with my partner and like wanted not be on opposite schedules and wanted to be able to go do stuff and everything. It was not terribly hard for me to find day shift positions. Like Taylor was saying, they really try to balance experience. And so I feel like they tend to, it's probably 50-50 instead of like in the real nursing world, it might be like 75% nights and 25%. Like you might be lucky to find a day shift job. Moving on to a unit, I think it's probably about 50-50. They know that they're going to have better luck recruiting people if they do day shift positions. So I rotated on a couple contracts. Like I would do some like weeks of nights and things like that, and that was okay with me. But you certainly, if you're like, I only do night shift or I only do day shift, that's not a deal breaker, generally speaking. Again, it's that balance of, for me, it was the three things: the location, the pay package, and then everything else, the hospital and the shift time and all of that. And so you might have to like sacrifice a little bit on the pay or a little bit on the location if you're really committed to one shift or the other, but I don't think it's certainly doable to prioritize day shifts.
Perfect.
So one other thing on that, the other reason that I was very adamant to only work day shift, you do not get any differentials as a travel nurse. So you get your pay package, you're not getting paid $5 an hour for weekends and $5 an hour for nights or anything like that. So for me, I was like, if I can make the same working, a huge reason I stayed on nights when I was a staff nurse is because of the extra pay. If I'm not going to get that, I'm not trying to work nocturnal. So
makes sense. I wouldn't do it either. Is there a general demand for certain areas such as ED or med surg or peds? Didn't know. Another question from the crowd.
COVID's a little bit different. Obviously your ER and ICU are in huge demands right now, just because they're full at the brim. But honestly, med surg and tele are right up there, because we just need the staff right now. There's just a national need for nurses. I will say some of your more specialized things like pediatrics, L&D, cath lab, PACU, those can get a little bit more, not that you're not going to find anything, but a little bit more restricted, but there's literally a need for anybody and everybody at the current moment.
I feel too, I wouldn't prioritize a certain specialty as a new grad RN because you want to travel nurse. Certainly if you can get a job in an ICU or in med surg or something like that, great, but do what you want to do. Like, you're going to be stuck in whatever specialty it is. I would not be a great adult ER nurse, but I loved peds ICU. I wouldn't like L&D. So even though, it might be lucrative or easier to find contracts on that thing, like, what you want to do, find a job that you want to do and stick with that specialty. Certainly though, I feel like specialize before you start travel nursing, because if you start in med surg and you hate it, don't go travel in med surg. You should go do your time in pay your dues in med surg and then pivot to whatever you want to be your long-term specialty and then go travel nurse. Because yeah, you're gonna be siloed to whatever you did. Like I was saying at the beginning, I was fortunate that I was in the float pool at Cincinnati Children's, but it was funny because every time I was trying to get an assignment, I was like, I can do anything in peds. I can do peds ER, I can do peds cardiac, I can do NICU. And they're like, great, you're going to the PICU. And that was fine. But there was always like way higher demand for peds ICU than there was for anything else. So I started as like a pretty versatile peds nurse. And by the end, I was pretty much just a peds ICU nurse because that was always what there was demand for. There are certainly enough, if you want to go into pediatrics, there is certainly enough demand for peds nurses to make that happen.
Great, and that was the last question. So thank you so much. If there's any other questions, please feel free to reach out to Stephanie and Taylor. Are there any last final words from you, either of you?
The biggest thing is really, really, really do your research. You have to kind of soul search, know what's important to you. Do reach out to anyone within your network. It makes a huge difference. Like, I reached out to Steph. Steph was a big mentor for me in college. And thankfully she's still following through with all of those things. So reach out. You don't know what you don't know. There's going to be a huge learning curve regardless. So, if you can set yourself up for success, asking those questions ahead of time and doing some deep dive searches, it's going to really pay off for you.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's a huge, feels like a huge risk, feels like a huge like dive, but also at the same time, the benefits are like unlimited. There's so much good to say about it. So don't let us scare you by saying that, with our negative experiences, like there's a reason that we're still here talking about it because we both love it. So don't overthink it. Like, do your research, but also don't overthink it. Like, just know that you're going to make some mistakes and you're going to learn from those, and just go do it. It's worth it.
Yep.
Great. Well, thank you both so much, Stephanie and Taylor, for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here today and present this awesome information to our alumni and the students that are on today. So thank you so much. If anyone, like I mentioned before, does have any questions, I did repost Stephanie and Taylor's emails in the chat. So with that being said, thanks again, and everyone have a wonderful day. Happy Friday and go Bearcats.
Yay, go Bearcats. Bye.